They're all dead, don't have to wait this time, 'cause I'm giving up on my sense of
The desperation for content continues, this time rounding up all of my old-ass reviews on shoot 'em ups, one of my all-time favorite genres. Now I gotta be honest, some of these reviews go all the way back to 2015, so they're kinda shitty, but aside from that, enjoy it for what it is. It was kinda fun looking back, although it's more embarrassing than anything. So here they are, my collection of shoot 'em up reviews. Shooters, shoot 'em ups, shmups. Whatever you call it, I can't get enough of the genre. Quite frankly, I'm considering myself addicted. Now mainly I've been focusing on 16-bit era shooters, but today we're going to go back in time a little bit and go back to 1991 and check out GUN-NAC. Released for the NES in North America in September 1991. Developed by Compile Games, GUN-NAC is immediately recognizable as a cute 'em up, or a cutesy-ass shooter. And by cute, I mean insanely adorable. Throughout 8 levels, you consume the role of Commander GUN-NAC. You fight a host of enemies from your spaceship. The ship can be upgraded to a larger ship by acquiring a wing, which allows the players to sustain 2 enemy hits rather than 1, and allows you to also upgrade your weapons further than the standard ship would allow. The game contains 5 primary weapons, as well as 4 types of secondary bombs. Examples of primary weapons found in the game are your standard gun, a flamethrower, and a type of guided boomerang. All weapons have unlimited ammunition. They are obtained by collecting circles with numbers that correspond to one of the 5 different weapons. The primary weapons can be upgraded by collecting multiple power Ps that float throughout the stage. Most of your gun upgrades in the game are identifiable by a number, like 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. This is pretty cool and convenient, however, when you have the weapon you want to stick with, you get popped up with the number 1 out of nowhere, and sometimes there's no getting around grabbing that 1 and it's back to scratch. GUN-NAC has an interesting plot, and I quite like it. In the distant future, the Earth's resources have been depleted, and many of the Earth's inhabitants are moving to the new artificial solar system called Iota Synthetica. The solar system, like all the other solar systems created by the Galactic Federation, is very hip and upscale. This image ended abruptly through as a mysterious wave of cosmic radiation swept through the solar system. The radiation caused ordinary inanimate objects to spring to life and attack the solar system's residents. The Galactic Federation, realizing the situation was beyond their control, calls on Commander GUN-NAC, son of the legendary Zan, to save Iota Synthetica from the ensuing destruction from his strange cosmic energy. Gameplay, graphics, and music in GUN-NAC are outstanding, and I have no complaints on any of it. The difficulty isn't extremely hard. Honestly, it's one of the more easiest shooters, so experienced vets to the genre will have no trouble completing GUN-NAC in about an hour. For those new to the genre though, have fun. This is a great way to get your feet wet also. GUN-NAC incorporates kind of a leveling system that is pretty good, and I don't really have a complaint about that either. Money can be found randomly floating through the levels, and being released or destroyed by objects or enemies that can be used to purchase upgrades in the shop. You can upgrade turbo boost, bomb, and other upgrades. And the artwork in the shop definitely has an anime manga inspired theme to it, which is great. So that's GUN-NAC, an excellent shooter from the 8-bit era and one of the definitive classics in the shooter genre. A physical cartridge of GUN-NAC is kind of pricey, and if you're really into the genre, go for it. You got nothing to lose, it's a great game.
Let's get back to basics a little bit. One of my favorite all-time video game genres is shooters. Shoot 'em ups, shmups, whatever you want to call it. We've seen a ton of these over the years, and all variations and forms, from kiddies to hardcore badass ones. Now, I feel like in my experience with these games, the best ones are always the ones that feel a little bit different and separate itself from the pack and think outside the box. Today's game, Crisis Force, does enough of that to make me regard it as one of the best shoot 'em ups of all time. From the graphics for its time, the gameplay, the gimmick of morphing into like some Phoenix character on steroids, to the music. Flat out, best part of this game, as good as it is the goddamn music. Remixers! How have you not heard any of this yet? Get on it! This was only released in Japan and came right after the release of the Super Famicom, and was Konami's last shooter effort on the NES, so they totally pushed the boundaries of the graphics at the time, and it showed from all the parallax scrolling to the incredible detail. While it may have only been released in Japan, it wasn't popular there. Japanese video game fans had moved on to the next-gen console, the Super Famicom, and unfortunately this was left in the dust and even became a cult classic in Japan. In the game, you play in ships piloted by Asuka and Maya, a pair of twin siblings descended from the ancient civilizations of Mu, who must save the world from a breed of artificial monsters from the lost civilization of Atlantis. Wow. That's a hell of a jump and a hell of a reach for your story arc. I mean, I just thought it was aliens, but Atlantis? You collect a certain amount of blue or red gems to power up your ship into its 3 different forms, the first being a front offense attack, the second a side, and the third obviously a rear offense attack. Finally, when you're completely power up, like I said again, you turn into this Ultra Zord type thing that just glows radiation and destroys everything in its path. My biggest complaint might be that sometimes the enemy sprites blend in with the background so much it's hard to see the bullets coming at you, but that's alright. This game has way too much going for it for me to nitpick it. It's unfortunately expensive, but emulate it! That's what I did. It's still fun. Hibiki Quickie! Until next time.
This time let's check out one of the most sought after and one of the greatest shooters from the 16-bit era. This is M.U.S.H.A for the Sega Genesis. Developed by Compile in 1990 and published by Talplan, this title never made it stateside actually until 2008 when it was released on the Virtual Console. M.U.S.H.A is definitely one of the more pricey Sega Genesis games. Complete in box will cost you between $300 to $400 depending where you get it from. The gameplay of M.U.S.H.A is standard shooter fare for this era. It is a vertical shooter. M.U.S.H.A will always hold a place with me as one of the few shooters I've never actually been able to beat. This game is hard. Although that is not compromised by bad gameplay or anything like that, M.U.S.H.A is just a truly good challenge and extremely difficult. The power-ups you obtain in M.U.S.H.A are called P-chips. The power-ups cause the main mecha to change color and grant sub-weapons. The sub-weapon also acts as a shield. If the mecha has a sub-weapon and is hit by an enemy attack, the sub-weapon is destroyed in place of the mecha. The sub-weapons can be upgraded up to 4 times if the player obtains the same power-up more than once though. The sub-weapons also include an energy shield, a beam cannon, and missiles. The music in M.U.S.H.A is really upbeat with that gritty Sega Genesis tempo to it, but I actually prefer the music from Gary's if you're going for the best shooter music on the Sega Genesis. After 2 decades from its initial release, M.U.S.H.A, as far as graphics, gameplay, and overall design, definitely holds up as one of the best, if not the best shooter on the Sega Genesis.
One of the most classic games of the Atari era was Defender. Aside from Combat and Jungle Hunt, Defender is my all-time favorite Atari 2600 game. So had I lived in Japan in my childhood in 1989, I would have been ecstatic at the release of BALTRON for the Famicom. BALTRON is basically Defender on steroids for the NES. Exclusively for the Famicom in 1989, BALTRON was released. BALTRON is a fun little shooter, not quite as classic as Defender, but you'll get quite a bit more play out of BALTRON as there are more stages and more variety like going in caves, and different power-ups like a blue capsule, a yellow capsule, and a koala, all doing different things. The blue capsule grants the player more health, the yellow capsule grants the player invincibility for a short time, and the koala grants the player an extra life. Defender didn't have any of this. The graphics, I must say, are nothing to write home about as far as the NES standards go. We've seen this done far better on the NES. However, I don't think the developers really were concerned about graphics as they were gameplay. And while the gameplay is pretty precise and tight, something that is pretty cool in BALTRON is when you go to a different zone, this little transition. So go ahead and pick yourself up a copy of BALTRON. You really have nothing to lose, especially if you're a fan of the classic Defender series. This is Hibiki Quickie. Check it out next time when it's GameCube.
It really is a crying shame looking back in the 80s and 90s, all the great titles that gamers were cheated out of, that were really only ever released in Japan for like the Famicom and Super Famicom. Games that immediately come to mind are games like the Back to the Future game for Super Nintendo and Sweet Home, the legendary Famicom survival horror role-playing game. But today's game is basically part 2 in a series that never saw its way stateside until later on, when this title was released in 1987 from Konami. It's Stinger for the NES. Now, Stinger is the unofficial sequel to Twin-B, a shoot-'em-up shooter released only in Japan. Stinger had its name changed from M.U.S.H.A Twin-B, exclamation point included, to just Stinger, which is basically the name of your ship in the story. This is set 100 years after the events of the original Twin-B game. Now, one thing about the Twin-B series as a whole that people are either one side of the fence on or not is the gameplay gimmick of juggling bells for power-ups, and that's no different in Stinger. You can immediately tell it falls in line with the rest of the series, as it's basically the same thing. It just mixes up like that hybrid again of vertical and horizontal shooter. As far as those differences between the Famicom and the NES versions of the game, really it's just the difficulty settings. In America, we only got like the default version. We didn't get a chance to select the option of the difficulty in the beginning. In Japan, you got easy, medium, or hard. When you do beat the game on the NES version, however, it does replay automatically on the hard setting. The music is nice, no real complaints, nothing too fancy, but it does what it's intended to do. The bottom line for me on my thoughts on Stinger for the NES, it didn't set my world on fire initially, but after playing a go-through, it's definitely one of the best shooters for the NES. Not one of my favorite shooters of all time, but a solid choice for your collection. Thank you to Faraway Compliment Guy on Twitter for the recommendation in playing this game. As for the Twin-B series, there's really not a bad Twin-B game in my eyes, and maybe the Game Boy one just because it didn't transition well. Other than that, it's all worth checking out. Collectors, all a must-have for your collection. Until next time, Hibiki Quickie.
While the popular opinion is the Super Nintendo trumps the Sega Genesis in almost every genre, nobody can deny, however, that the Sega Genesis had the Super Nintendo beat when it came to shoot-'em-ups. Zero Wing, Gyres, or Gary's, however you pronounce it, I've never figured it out. Musha, the list just goes on and on, but today we're going to hit probably the bottom of the barrel. Probably not the bottom of the barrel, but definitely the most mediocre of the bunch. Today we're going to take a look at Soul DEACE, released in 1990 for the Sega Genesis. Now, the history and origin of Soul DEACE is a little bit confusing, but not too bad. Soul DEACE was developed by Wolf Team and published by Sega and first released exclusively in Japan on November 22nd, 1990. It was then released worldwide for the Sega CD in '91. Soul Feast was actually one of the first pack-in titles released with the Sega CD. Now, while it hit Japan in '91, it didn't actually make its way to the States until October 1992, and in Europe in '93. The version of Soul Feast features rearranged Red Book background music and exclusive animated cutscenes. In a very strange move, Soul Feast's name was changed to Soul DEACE in '92 and was released imported to cartridge form for the Sega Genesis. Essentially, Soul DEACE is the same as Soul Feast, with just downgraded graphics and music, pretty much what the hardware capabilities of the Sega Genesis could handle. But it does handle it quite well, especially the music. The very first track in the game in Soul DEACE is one of my favorite all-time Sega Genesis themes. Check it out. Now for a story, I'm not even going to waste my time going into detail. I don't like the story. It involves space warfare and just avenging a father's death. We've seen this done time and time again, and honestly, for a shoot 'em up at the time, you don't need a story, period. As with the rest of the pack of the Genesis shooters, Soul DEACE is spot on as far as gameplay. Now most and all good shooters honestly have a gimmick to them, and that's no different here. In Soul DEACE, you can use a dual cannon pickup weapon that can fire shots in diagonal angles. The cannons can be positioned to fire straight or diagonally only when the ship is not firing its weapons, and can fire different shots depending on the weapon. All in all, the bosses are designed well, the levels make you think, not just plow your way through. Soul DEACE is a good game. It's nothing fancy or special like Musha, but Soul DEACE is right up there with one of the best Genesis shoot-em-ups, though it's in the middle of the pack honestly because this competition is just sky high as far as this genre on the Sega. With the amount of games in this genre for the Sega, it is definitely quite easy to get lost spending an entire day trying to cover every game. With games like Vapor Trail and Ride and Trad that I haven't even mentioned, the competition was so high for developers that published games for the Sega that even releasing a great game like this, which if it would have been on Super Nintendo would have been a gem, it just doesn't stand out from the pack. There's more appealing and more fun shooter games on the Sega Genesis, but this is a good game like I said. It's one of the only shooters I know of released for the Sega CD, so the fact that they even ported this down and to the Mega Drive is just baffling. There's no way they made any money off of this. It just wouldn't stand out. And it's not exactly like the Sega CD did gangbusters for Sega anyways. For the explorers of the old school genre, there are a lot worse games you could discover along the way. If you've never played a lot of the shooters on the Sega and never even heard of this game, go ahead and check it out. You could do a lot worse. For those of you that do like a lot better shooters on the Sega Genesis, then go ahead and skip this one. You're not really missing too much.
There